Welcome back to the Prosperity Playbook. We have a special guest on today. So today you have Renee Britt and Susan Beth Breuner. She is a photographer here in Bozeman and is a great friend of both Renee and I. She has taken photos of both of us many times, and so we've gotten very close with her. And Susan Beth has lived a really interesting life and has played a lot of roles. And something that we wanted to talk about today is how you can go about making a switch, not only later in life, but any time in life, and how to know when it's the right decision to kind of make a big life altering change. So I want to start with just kind of take us back, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've been, and how you got to where you are today.
I'm Susan Beth Breuner. I'm a mom, a wife, and a businesswoman. And how I got to where I am today, it's kind of a long story. I went to school. I got a degree in social work. I worked as a child protective services social worker.
Thank you for doing that. That is a very hard job.
It was a very hard job. I was on the Hoopa Indian Reservation in Northern California,
Wow.
in a rural community, and I went from there with an intention to go to law school. I went back to the Bay Area. Worked for a year while I applied and did everything. Went to law school. I was a lawyer, first at a big firm, then at a little itty bitty tiny 2-person firm. So big firm in the Bay Area, 2-person firm in Tahoe. And then I became kind of the support person for some entrepreneurial things for my husband while we worked through some infertility issues and ended up with our son. And then eventually, like when he was 16, our son, I ended up starting a photography business as my husband made his own transition from being a lawyer to being a judge. And I've been focused on photography ever since. But even within that, I've allowed there to be some changes, and I love that.
Yeah. I think something that's so fascinating to me is how different of worlds those things are, right? Like when I think about being in law, it's very structured and there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of scheduling, and it's just like it's a lot more dry. And then photography is so creative, and like, yes, of course there's still scheduling and there's still a lot of that back end stuff, but it unlocks a totally different part of your brain. And so I think that is really cool to me, that you have succeeded and thrived in such different roles.
Yes and no. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of creativity in law. You have to write, you have to think, you have to come from a different perspective. You have the facts and you have the law, and you need to be able to put those things together to advocate for your client. And sometimes those facts are so different than anything else you're seeing that you can be asking for the law to apply differently. And that's where you're using that, I think, creative part of your brain. And there are a lot of lawyers out there who have creative hobbies that they're really passionate about. And I would say most lawyers are more creative than you would expect. And a lot of that paperwork is not done by the lawyers. It's done by their secretary or their legal assistant, paralegal.
That's a super interesting perspective, and I've never thought of it that way, but that
Me
makes total
neither.
sense.
Yeah.
So,
That's like brand new information to me. I'm like, I didn't know this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think lawyers are pretty cool people, and their brains work in a way that allows them to navigate in and out of incredible things.
Yeah. So when you were working in those first roles, were you actively knowing that you didn't belong in them anymore and started seeking out new opportunities, or was it something that just kind of came more organically?
I think more organically, but differently as I transitioned from each of those two roles.
Okay.
So as a child protective services social worker, I thought I would maybe eventually transition into being a therapist or a counselor and that kind of
You'd
thing.
be fantastic at that.
Yes.
Thank you. But I loved the court part of that. I loved writing for the court. I loved testifying in court. Those were stressful things and hard things, but that part of the job really appealed to me.
Wow.
So then when I did leave social work, I knew at that time I wanted to go into lawyering and apply. I left social work though. I did it for, I did social work as a career for a total of about 5 years. 3.5 of that was in Child Protective Services. I was single at the time. My family lived 700 miles away. I did have friends, but it was a lonely place, and my cup was being emptied every day, and there was nobody to come home to fill it up.
That's rough.
And I never thought I would have burnout because I've always been just this endurance kind of a person. And then one day I made a recommendation in court, and I got in the elevator, and the client got in the elevator, and they threatened me right there in front of a sheriff's officer. And the sheriff's officer's looking at me like, do not get out of this elevator until I tell you you can. And in the 10-minute drive between the courthouse and the office, I said, I'm done. And I went to my office. I picked up the phone. I made a probably illegal long distance call to my mom and said, I'm coming home, get it ready.
Wow.
And I walked into the office and I said to my boss, I love you. I love everybody in this office. I'm done. I can't do this. This is beyond what I can do as a single, relatively isolated person in this situation.
Good for you.
And that was it.
I think that's amazing, because I think a lot of people would have just suffered through for a while, but being able to recognize that that was just not your jam anymore, you weren't in a good space, and being able to recognize that and immediately act on it, I think that's really amazing. So kudos.
I can do that. I can make a pretty quick decision and process pretty quickly. And I need to correct myself to say, at that day, I didn't know that I would pursue law. But within 2 weeks of getting home, I met with a friend who said, why aren't you going to law school? I always thought you should. So it felt like a pretty immediate transition after that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So did you have something specific, like a type of law that you knew you wanted to do from that point?
I went into law school thinking I would go into criminal law and be probably a prosecutor. I came out of law school with a huge interest and a fortunate placement for environmental litigation. So toxics, spills.
Very different.
Very different. But I was really, by the time I got out of law school, I really did not feel comfortable with the ethics of being a prosecutor. I had seen some things that just made me say, oh, when it becomes just about winning and not about what's the truth, I got a problem. I don't think I can do that. That wouldn't be me.
That makes sense. Yeah. That would be hard for me too.
I do think, regardless of what job you're in or what role you're in, if you're a mom or if you're an auntie, there are so many different avenues that you can take within that role. And something that I think myself and a lot of people have a tendency to fall into is the supposed tos, right? I'm supposed to do this, or I signed on to be a CPS worker, and so that's what I have to do for my career. And then 50 years later, you retire after being miserable for 40 of them. And I think that that's something that a lot of people get stuck in, is just, I'm supposed to do this, or I committed to this, so I have to stay committed to it. And I mean, I have so many kudos to you for just being willing to rip the Band-Aid off and not sitting somewhere where you don't belong for any longer than you have to.
Yes. I mean, I feel good about that. I feel like
should.
that's what I did. I took some criticism.
I'm sure.
I had people say, oh, you can't hold this particular career for longer than 3 years. You change your life majorly every 3 years, which wasn't quite accurate, but it was something that when it was said to me by my uncle, I was like, is this true? I need to really evaluate what this is true. And it wasn't true. And I saw the through lines of what I was doing. I saw going to law school after having been a social worker who spent a lot of time in court. That wasn't a complete change. I wasn't completely changing my world. I was changing my role within that world.
Well, you just said that you evaluated whether that was true instead of just taking what your uncle said as the gospel. And I think a lot of people, especially younger people, and probably especially young women, if somebody that is older and maybe a male figure told them that, they might just be like, oh, man, there is something wrong with me. So this is exactly why I wanted to do this episode, because I think there's so many people out there that do feel stuck. They're shooting all over themselves. They're doing what is expected of them. Or maybe they threw it out there as just dangled it out. Like, maybe I'm going to do this, and somebody shut them down, or somebody told them that they were doing it wrong. And that was it. And then they just were like, okay, I guess this is my life, and here's where I'm stuck forever. And I've got a daughter that's getting ready to go to college, and she thinks she knows what her path is. And I'm like, do you though? And like, I don't care if you do. I honestly very strongly think she will change what her plan is. And that's great. And I want her to know that that's fine. Just because you choose one path doesn't mean you're destined to it forever.
Absolutely. I started out college thinking I was going to be a forestry major and go and be a forest ranger. Having very little idea of what forest rangers actually do. and how much science went into a forestry degree, which was really more about managing forests. And what I needed was more of a hospitality degree to be able to be the kind of forest ranger that I would see at the national parks, who greets you and talks to you. And it was a very different thing. And then I was going to teach preschool. And then I found social work, and it's probably the best degree I could have gotten for me. And I've used it in every iteration of myself since 1986 when I graduated.
I love that. And I love that you said iteration of yourself. I love that. That's a good visual for me.
Yeah. So then moving forward, you making the hop from working in law into photography. Did photography start as a hobby or a creative outlet, or what were kind of your initial, what was the first thing that sparked your idea of that might be something that you would want to do?
Well, ironically, I got my first single reflex lens camera, because yes, I'm that old that it wasn't even digital yet. I got that as a gift from my parents while I was in law school. Little did they know.
Wow, that is some
Thanks,
irony.
Mom and Dad. Nice job.
And so I definitely had a passion for photography. I had watched my grandfather be a hobbyist photographer. I was in love with Ansel Adams' work. I loved several photographers and bought books all through college of photographers who photographed in the civil rights era. So black and white photography of these very dramatic events that were happening in the South, that I was old enough to know those things were part of my lifetime sometimes, not always, and I knew they were important.
Yeah.
So I've lost my train of thought just a little bit here, so the passion was there all along.
So throughout law school, you were taking photos, and it was a hobby at that point in time.
That's how I relaxed.
Okay.
Yeah. And I really took a lot of landscape photos. I backpacked in the summer times between my work opportunities. And so photography was there all along. And then when I left lawyering in order to have a child. So it had nothing to do with photography. But when my child was born, I took a lot of pictures of him, and I got better at photography. So it was right there with me.
What a perfect subject to practice on.
Yes, it was.
Can't go anywhere.
I sure thought so. But I'm going to be really honest to say I was still using my camera in fully auto. It's like I had this expensive camera that I could do all these things with. I had no idea how to do it. I just wanted a nice picture of my baby. And I wasn't going to be Ann Geddes, and I knew that, but I wanted a beautiful picture of my child.
Yeah.
So I worked on that.
So let's talk about that transition a little bit more. I'm going to guess that maybe even though the parents got you a camera, maybe you got a little bit of pressure from the outside world if you're going from this very stable career to maybe something that, I would wager to say there's probably a lot of photographers out there that don't make a good living at it. So you're going into something that's probably a risk, and starting your own business. And so talk to me about that a little bit. What did that look like? How did it feel?
Leaving lawyering, we had to do IVF to get our son. We ended up having to do 5 rounds of it. This was back in the late 90s. And so leaving lawyering in order to be able to do that and to then if we were successful, be able to raise a child without working a job that required 60 to 70 hours a week from me, and be able to raise more like I envisioned myself raising a child. That felt internally very good. This is necessary. This is the next step to really the ultimate goal. I was working at a small firm. I loved the lawyer I was working with. It was in Truckee, California. The work that I was doing was interesting, but not super complex. My first lawyering job had been at a very large law firm, very complex litigation. I was a little cog in big wheels. This was all me. I was the only one on the case, and I was the one who was going to make it happen or not happen. So leaving that to go and do what we needed to do was easy peasy decision.
Interesting.
People's response to me leaving that was not always easy peasy.
Sure.
The person I remember the most just saying, "You have to go back to lawyering. What a waste if you don't," is actually my husband's ex-father-in-law, who my husband had stayed very close to. And we were hiking with him, and he was just dumbfounded that I would do this and that I would waste this education. And at that time, I didn't know if I would ever go back or not. I just knew I wasn't going to lawyer while raising an infant, toddler, and preschooler. That's all I knew at that time.
Well, that does make sense, though, that people, I'm sure that's a thing that people get pushback on, right? Like, especially when you go to law school, like, I'm sure that wasn't cheap, and there's costs, not even just the waste of education, but the money. I'm sure that is a thing that people really ponder. And it's one of the reasons I always advocate for people not to go to school unless they really know that is what they're going to do. But I think sometimes you just don't know until it's done. I mean, I have a biotechnology degree, for God's sake. Like, you just don't know.
Well, I think too on that point, like you said a waste, but really just like we talked about in our relationships episode, I think that certain jobs, careers, roles can be in your life for a period of time for a significant reason.
Absolutely.
You know, and so like if you learned more about yourself, if you learned how to communicate better,
Exactly.
if you built relationships in that career, even if it was a short-term career, it was worth it.
Yeah, it's not a waste. It's all a part of who you are, everything of that.
Yeah.
Well, and being able to look back on it, I come from a Christian faith perspective, and there's a kind of a phrase in there coming from an Old Testament Bible story. For such a time as this, I was a child protective services social worker. Then I was a lawyer. And my husband stopped lawyering and roasted coffee, and I supported him in that. Can't really see any connections there. But when we moved to Montana, he went back to lawyering, and I became his office support staff because he had a passion for doing public defender work. And then he also, through that public defender work, ended up representing parents in cases where child abuse is alleged against the parents. So my child protective services social worker and my lawyering skills were used for that entire 15 years that he did that kind of work.
Absolutely.
And if without either of those things, I would have been pretty much useless to him, and he would have had to have a very different model of his law practice and not be able to do the contractor public defender work because he would have had to have a support staff. So it just, to me, it all wound up together in an unpredictable way. Because if you'd asked me when we made some of those decisions, I'm like, we're going to roast coffee for the rest of our lives, and we're going to be moguls of coffee in the Sierra Nevada. And isn't this great?
Yeah. It is pretty fascinating how two completely unrelated things, if you're looking at them on paper, can actually be so much more interconnected than you realize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know how things are going to kind of work out. But it sounds like you kind of weren't beating yourself up over it in the beginning. You were in a good headspace making that transition. Is that true?
It is true. My husband was incredibly supportive. The idea that we were both on the same page about how we wanted to raise our child, the fact that we had gone through so much to get him. Also, during that time, before we got pregnant, like right before we started, my mom passed away at a very young age. And so we were just bonded together on this family is where our focus is. And he felt confident about where we were financially. Now we ended up blowing through some of what we thought was our long-term
Nest egg.
doing a coffee roasting company that didn't turn out to work out. But we've never starved or anything like that. We did make some big sacrifices to keep me as a stay-at-home mom whose work for him had to fit around mom duties, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Well, but you also didn't let that failure of the coffee, and maybe failure is not the right word. I don't like that word anyway.
No, it's the right word.
But you didn't let that define you. It didn't let that stop you from trying the next thing. And I think that's amazing. I think that's how it should be.
No, I find this to be true in a lot of settings. When the coffee roasting company needed to be done, it needed to be done. And that was a part of that adventure. That it wasn't somehow something was ripped away from us. It was like, this isn't working, and it's not working in this economy, and it's not working for these reasons. And it is time to transition to something else. And not that that wasn't a good time. It was a great time. It was a good time for us in our marriage. It was a good time for us in the community that we were in. We loved it. But would we go back now if we could and say, let's magically make that have worked and relive our life from that point on? Neither one of us would. We've talked about that many times. Neither one of us would say that.
I do think it's really beautiful, the perspective that you take, because in the psychology world, there's something called the sunk cost fallacy, which is basically like you stay way too long because of the time that you've already invested. And so you guys could have tried to force that to work, right? You could have said, well, we've already invested all of this time and this was the dream, and like, we're just going to keep trucking through. And instead you adopted a really positive mindset and said, you know what, it's time for the next chapter, and that's okay. And I think that's so healthy.
I do too. I'd love to know, is there something that happened, or how did you know it was time to shut that down and move on to the next thing?
Because the stock market was going like this, and we were borrowing in the margin.
For those of you who aren't watching, the stock market was not doing well.
And it was just, the money was going to run out. We still had money left, but it was going to run out, and it just wasn't logical anymore. And I grew up, my parents didn't even own a home. We did not have stock markets. We did not have any of that in our life. I knew that it existed out there. I knew it had caused the depression. I knew just all sorts of, it had been a symptom of the depression. So my husband was the one who kind of was able to manage that and to say, and he grew up with that. He grew up with an account. He grew up with his grandfather leaving him money to put into stocks. He had so much of a better sense of what to do about that. We blew through all of that money and got down to just the real property that we owned. We sold it and we moved here. But his sense about it, I would have stayed in the coffee business for longer. The idea that we were leaving the friends that we had made, that we had raised our children, we all had babies within a 30-day period of time. We met through that process, and then we made this great friend group. I would have stayed. I cried. I'm not suggesting that this was easy, but it was definitely the right thing. And sometimes the things that make you sad, you still know it's the right thing, and you have to do it. And I think both my husband and I have a sense of being able to do that. And as long as we're on the same page about what the next step is, we're okay.
You guys seem like you have a really cool relationship.
Most of the time.
I think that's all anybody can hope for. Most of the time.
If your relationship is perfect 100% of the time, you're literally lying.
Yeah, you're doing it wrong.
Very true. Yeah.
Well, let's step into talking about the photography piece of it then. So when you decided that was something you were going to make your new business, what were your first steps that you took to make that happen?
I'm going to say there was some serendipity in there because I had been watching things on the internet, on Facebook, a particular photographer, some education, because I wanted to be a better photographer, because I realized I was underutilizing. And as weird as this sounds, I was scrapbooking the pictures that I had taken of my child. And turned out a good scrapbooker, and I got a couple of my projects published in magazines.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
But I got also some really honest feedback to say you would get more published if your photos were better. So I set out in about 2010, 11 to take a year off of scrapbooking and just focus on my photos. And I never went back to scrapbooking.
Interesting.
I didn't. So then I wanted to be the best photographer that I could be. And my husband got an opportunity to go from being a lawyer to be the city court judge in Belgrade, Montana. And when he did that, we had a year to kind of close down his law office. So I was doing that, got obviously somewhat slower and slower. And I reached out to somebody and said, I need some mentorship. I admire your photography. I know one of your family members. You don't know me from Adam, but I would like to have you help me with my editing process. And they got back to me. It was actually a husband-wife team who are still really good friends of mine today. They got back to me and said, we need some new contracts. Can you trade us? And I said, yes, I can do that. And I don't have a law license, so I can draft contracts, but my husband has to approve them before I show them to you. So that's how we did that.
Awesome. I think asking for help and being willing to look like a beginner again can be a huge hurdle for a lot of people. So good on you for being willing to be vulnerable in that.
Yeah.
What did you have to lose, right? Yeah.
Well, they could have said no, and I'd have to find somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, but I think you kind of are making that seem very natural for you, but I don't think it is natural for everybody. I think asking for help can be a challenge for a lot of people. And I think there's a balance there too, because when you are brand new in the business, you have to have some vulnerability to look for mentorship, but you also have to have enough confidence to just do it and jump in. And it's one of the things, when people get into the mortgage business, they all want to wait till they know everything. And I'm like, you are literally never going to know everything.
Yeah.
At some point, you just have to go out there and start getting loans. And so there is that balance between how do I know that it's time for me to just start charging people money to take pictures? What was that process for you?
Probably slower than it should have been. And probably my pricing today still reflects that slow inability to charge what I was actually worth. That was a hard thing, I think, probably 5 or 6 years of way undercharging and way over delivering. And I don't mean that in a resentful way of those projects, but I was just so desperately wanting to be able to take photos that I would do anything to get people to let me take their photos.
Yeah.
But I knew I needed to charge something.
Well, and I think being a photographer, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would feel like in this day and age where everybody has an iPhone in their pocket and everybody just snaps pictures of themselves constantly, it is a harder industry to show your worth and show the value of the photos that you take versus my shitty ones that I take on my iPhone, right?
Your iPhone might take some pretty damn good
Yeah,
photos.
I'm not blaming the iPhone. I'm blaming me.
Yes, it is hard in that way. And I did not come with marketing skills. That's part of what happened to our coffee roasting company is that neither one of us had marketing skills. And at that time, the internet wasn't in everybody's home.
Yeah.
And we just sucked at marketing. That's the honest truth of it. My husband made a really good product and with a really good story, and we had no idea how to tell that to people. In photography, I had the same issue. I was a technically good photographer because I had worked really hard on the technical part, but I had no idea how to talk to people about what I could do for them in photography. It was a long slog of a lot of online classes, a lot of mentoring, short periods of time with these people or those people, a lot of going back to the safe place of, but I'm technically very good. And it's really easy to continue to work on your technical skills, thinking that's somehow going to change it. And even today, I still struggle with that, especially with the strong, confident femininity side of my business. I still really struggle to be able to market it boldly and
Yeah.
not be so focused on the quality of my pictures, but be really focused on the story I want to tell.
I think that's very common for business owners. And even for me as a loan officer, I tell people that all the time. I got into this business thinking if I was the best at what I did, people would line up around the block for me. Well, it turns out that if nobody knows that you're the best at what you do, they will not line up. And in fact, zero people line up if they don't know about you. So obviously, you've kind of figured out this marketing thing a little bit here. So I want to hear how that happened for you, because I do think that there are a lot of people that are still struggling with that. And by the way, stay tuned. We are going to give you all of Susan Beth's social media stuff at the end. Of course, like subscribe, follow us, and then also her as well. She's a phenomenal photographer. She said she's taken photos of me multiple times. I literally hate having pictures taken, but she makes it amazing. So
Can
stay
confirm.
tuned. Yeah. And then we do have another episode that we're going to do right after this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about reclaiming your identity and seeing the way that you want to be seen. So stay tuned for that. But I want to jump back in here and finish this one up and talk a little bit more about marketing. How have you learned that? I know you do a lot of social media stuff, which again, we'll link at the end, but, tell us what that journey was like for you.
It's continuing.
Of course, absolutely.
It is. I have learned more about marketing. I'm not sure if I'm as effective at it as I would like to be. I certainly have room for growth in my business. I'm fortunate that I don't have to support a whole family in Bozeman on my income, that I have a partner who's got an income so that
Sure.
I can fuss with this a little bit.
Yeah.
So marketing is everything for me, from I need more followers on Instagram to when I first started and looked at this, Facebook was a leading place to market. And now, frankly, it's a shit place to market because it's so full of a lot of stuff that isn't good.
Yeah.
And I have a better website. I gotten help from Ariel, who we all know, on my website and my SEO. And so I would say the most successful thing I've done is bump up my SEO so that my website actually works for me. Instagram gets a lot of people who say, "Oh, I've seen your stuff. Oh, I know who you are." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you haven't ever liked anything, because I'd recognize your name if you had."
Yeah.
I think a lot of what I'm hearing is you were willing to just kind of stumble through it and figure it out as you go,
I'm still
and
stumbling.
learn the things that you don't know. Because, I think we all get into a career wanting to do this specific job, but there are so many other things that come in there, especially as a business owner, where it's like, yeah, you may be a damn good photographer, but you have to be a photographer, and you have to be a bookkeeper, and you have to be an accountant, and you have to be a CPA, and you have to be a marketer. And, there's so many pieces that go into it.
Well, I know you showed me that you were doing some writing on your Google page, and that was really helping your SEO. Tell us about that.
Actually a big deal. On your Google business page, you can put updates. And Ariel told me, if you update this on the pretty regular, do a blog post once a month, which I kind of fall down on that. That will help your SEO and make sure that you've got, all of your keywords and all of that other stuff. Once I started doing those Google page updates, I took her seriously, and I'm like, every Tuesday morning after Biz to Biz, I go to a coffee shop, I sit down and I update for both my Elements of Light photography, which is weddings and portraits, and then for my Strong Confident Femininity, which is women's intimate portraits. I write an update for each of those. Takes me a total of about 20 minutes for both of them. And it's can't be more than 1,500 characters anyways. So it's not a big update. I do that once a week. And within 4 months, I was number one for Bozeman Boudoir and for Montana Boudoir.
Wow.
That's
It
amazing.
was. And it just, my timing was right for when Google was reviewing things, because it could have taken longer to get there. And now I just continue to do that. And it's like an expanded Instagram post or a mini blog. And that's really what I use for it, is just the same topics that I talk about there. That's what I use, recycle that same material, but just now in the 1,500 character format.
That's so smart. I love that.
Oh, it's
A little
just,
insider secret.
I had no idea.
Yeah, me neither.
And I'm like, oh man. So that has been a super, super helpful thing for me relative to marketing. And that what has made my website be an opportunity for me that it wasn't a year and a half ago.
Awesome.
So do
So-
you feel like you found where you're supposed to be? Is photography where you think you were going to be all along, or is this still a part of the journey?
I suspect that photography is where I will be as long as I possibly can be. But I'm going to be honest and say that I felt like that about lawyering and I felt like that about social work.
Okay.
So if I need to shift, if I have to shift, I will. Life could throw some curveballs. If something happened to my husband and I needed to make a huge shift, I might not be able to force photography to meet that particular void in my life. And I might need to augment it or switch to something else. I feel like you have to just hold things kind of with an open hand and allow, as long as it's staying there with you, keep it, enjoy it, love it. When it flies away, if you spend all your time chasing after that instead of saying, but what else is in my hand now? You're going to be in a little bit of war with yourself as you're trying to force something that's just done.
I love that. That is excellent advice and a great image just to kind of keep that open hand versus a closed fist. That just kind of abundance and going with the flow. I think that's one of the things that I always give advice to these high school kids that I'm talking to and the college kids is I feel like the best thing you can do is be open to any opportunity. And no matter how out of the blue it is or how out of left field it is, that it's something maybe totally different, be open to it. Have conversations, give something a try. You can always shift.
Absolutely. If somebody came to you and said they were really unhappy in their job, but they felt like it was too late for them to change careers, what advice would you give them?
I think before I could give advice, I'd really have to listen to them. Do they feel like it's too late, or do they really not want to? Are they unhappy in the circumstances, but they could do some tweaking? And then if it turns out that, yeah, this career sucks for you and it is time to do something else, I would give them as much encouragement as I could that they're worth more than that and that they can take some risks. They're worth taking some risks for. And a lot of times it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Sometimes that transition can be, I'll give you an example. I have a brother, he's in his mid-40s. He's worked in construction almost all of his adult life. He's very good at it, but he's 6'4", over 200 pounds, and construction is hard on the body. And the bigger your body, the harder it is.
Right.
And he's like, I need to get indoors. And he has some deficits in his education background and other things that make him not have the confidence to switch. And he works for a company in California that's going to be sold. And that transition, do I stick here? Do I not? He's a foreman. He's probably the most beloved foreman in the whole company. So he's got some really great things. And I said, he also would like to build furniture, create furniture. He's got some creativity in him. I said, you don't have to quit your job to start building furniture. And I fully admit I used AI. I went on ChatGPT and I said, create a business plan that allows somebody who's working full time to begin to start a furniture making business on 4 to 8 hours a week for the first 2 years so that it wouldn't interfere. It could all be done on a Saturday.
Love that.
And it laid out a 5-year plan that allowed that to happen. For me, what that taught me, it's not necessarily that he should do that exact plan, but that you can make a transition away from something that's not working for you anymore without having to just walk away from it cold turkey. I did the walk away cold turkey from the Child Protective Services job. I don't think that that's the right thing to do every time. That was the right thing for me to do at that time. And my safety net required me, if I was going to use my safety net, I had to leave that area geographically and go back to my family. For other people, you can make that transition a little bit at a time. You can explore. You can have fits and starts. You can be like, oh, I started that way. Turns out that's not really quite what I wanted, but I can tweak it towards something else, or I can take an evening class and find out some more either about myself or about a skill set that I've been interested in. And I can move forward with something different, and it doesn't have to be instant.
I love that. Well, and I love that you brought up an AI example, because I kind of think you're the queen of AI. You use it a lot. So tell me more about ways that you use AI in your business.
Well, I want to be really clear. I do not use generative AI in my photography. I don't say, oh, I wish there was a plant here. Put a plant in there.
Good distinction.
Or look, this woman has a little bubble here, a little muffin top or something. AI, make that go away. I don't do that. So in my photography, the most, quote, AI that I use is I will like take out the garbage can and it'll just copy the wall next to it and make the wall be there instead of the garbage can, so that you don't have in your wedding photos as you're toasting this big, ugly garbage can that the venue put in a bad place. But for marketing, I use AI to give me marketing plans. I use AI to help me develop an ideal client profile so that I can figure out who I'm talking to. I use AI to, sometimes I'll say, here's a picture and this is what I want to talk about, and I need it in an Instagram format. I've trained AI to my own personal voice, and then it'll give me something and I'll cut and paste that into Instagram, and then I'll just edit away at it and get rid of what isn't really my voice. Like AI always wants to put emojis in there. I am not an emoji girl. It's not me. So I take all the emojis out and I change the voice a little bit. And I use it that way, not because it's writing for me, because I've told it very clearly, like if I get a 50-word response from it, I've probably put 150 to 300 words in there to tell it, this is kind of what I'm looking for. And then, like I said, I edit it to be my style, my voice. It knows my voice pretty well. I have less editing to do as I have trained it pretty well, but so I use it that way. Those part of why I can do those Google updates so quick is I can take an Instagram post that I liked that got good response. I can cut and paste it into AI and say, just expand this to 1,500 characters or shrink it to 1,500 characters. I tend to have long Instagram captions and it will do that for me. And again, I almost never just cut and paste it and leave it. I almost always am doing some editing with it, but I find less and less as AI, as my particular chatbot is able to be a little, gets more feedback from me. Sometimes now it'll say, we noticed this, here's 2 versions, which do you like better? Sometimes like, neither one, try again.
Yeah.
It's such a great tool, especially, when you're a business owner with no employees and you're the one that has to do it all. I think it can be a really great way to save yourself a lot of time.
Yeah, it's like a contract employee for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred AI? Do you use Claude?
I use ChatGPT.
You do use ChatGPT. Okay.
Just because that's where I started. And I had a marketing mentor who I was paying, and that's what she trained me on. And I haven't ever shopped around because it's like, I don't have time for that. I just need to move forward with what I've already got going. And it's already trained to who my ideal client avatar is. And we just go from there. But I forgot what I was going to say. So
Relatable.
Totally. Well, I think on that note, I think I kind of want to start wrapping this up here. Do you have any final thoughts or advice for somebody that's listening that maybe is sitting in a career that feels wrong, that maybe they should be thinking about?
I have had many conversations in my head saying, okay, if we go broke trying this between the coffee roasting company and the photography and even the law office and the particular way that we ran our law office, this is who will take us in if we lose our house. Or
So the backup plan.
Yes.
So for me, knowing, okay, the worst case scenario is still survival. works. But that's because I'm willing to let go of a whole lot of what the world tells me is success. Because for me, success is not about how much money I make. It's not about what kind of clothes I can wear. It's not about how beautiful my house is. It is about my relationships with people and my ability to be of value in the setting that I'm in. So if I was making $1 million a year at a job that I felt I really don't have any value here, but either because the job doesn't match my values or because the job is just, they don't pay you $1 million for shit jobs, but just, pretend that I need to be who I am, and valuing that in yourself, which kind of relates to what we'll talk about in the next episode of being seen. That is so much more important. And so letting go of all those expectations and stop performing for somebody else's dream and do what works for you. Even if you do have to sell your house and be in a rental while you're making a transition. That's not the end of the world. That is not the end of the world.
Stop performing for someone else's dream. That is perfect advice for us to end on. If people want to connect with you more, Susan Beth, tell us what the best way is for them to do so online.
So I have 2 websites. One is elements-of-light-mt.com. And that's weddings and portraits and business photos and headshots and senior portraits and that kind of thing. And then my passion is strongconfidentfemininity.com. So all run together, no hyphens in this one, strongconfidentfemininity.com. And that's my particular approach to intimate photography for women. I'm having a hard time calling it boudoir anymore because I really have kind of put my own twist on it to the point where some people would say, well, that's not really boudoir. And that's okay.
Well, we're going to talk about that more in the next episode too. We'll dive a little bit deeper into what that view looks like. Yeah. But you want to give us your social handles as well?
So Elements of Light Photo on Instagram, and that's all run together. And then strong_confident_femininity is the other one. And if you're male, I'm sorry, I will block you if you try to follow my strong confident femininity. That's fair. I just don't need to be.
I mean, we did just do a man haters episode a couple weeks ago, so
I'm not a man hater, but I'm not there to create personal entertainment for people.
Well, we have loved this conversation.
Absolutely.
We're so happy to have you on. It's very enlightening, and I'm just really inspired with the path that you have gone on. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it. You guys both know I listen to every episode. I have from the beginning, and it's an honor to get to be with you guys and to be shared with your audience.
Well, when we started talking about adding some guests this year, you were at the very top of our list.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
So yeah,
Krista's a pretty hard act to follow, though.
She's pretty great too.
Well, we will see you all next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Here's to empowering each other one story at a time.